Let's go to Canberra now and catch up with National Senator for Queensland, James McGrath. James, thanks for joining us. Just on that note, the amount of deficit spending in this country, it's very easy for governments to spend, no matter what the crisis. But there's got to be a word of warning, doesn't there, to governments, Labor and Liberal, state and federal, just not to get addicted to this level of expenditure.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm one of those old-fashioned fiscal conservatives, and we seem to be rare in number nowadays because the amount of government spending, I understand we had to spend a lot of money and borrow a lot of money to get through the pandemic. But I'm like you, I'm frightened that the government will get too used to spending Mr and Mrs taxpayers' money. We've got to remember, we've got to pay it back someday, and this is going to take a long time to pay back this debt. So, yeah, we've got to hang on tight here.
Yeah, on the upside, I think the only way to diminish the debt long term is economic growth. So there's got to be an acceptance from both sides of policy, both sides of politics, that we need economic reform, because otherwise we're just not going to grow strongly enough to put this debt behind us.
The only way you actually can pay down this debt is by growing the economy, and by growing the economy, that means by helping business. So you've got to cut taxes, you've got to make it easier to employ people, you've got to make it easier for businesses to grow, so you've got to cut red tape, and by doing that, people earn more money. They invest more money. People, funnily enough, pay more taxes then, even when you cut the tax rate, and that way we can get the debt down. And it's not going to take a year or two, it's going to take probably decades, but it's the government, and our government does have a pro-business approach. We need Labor also to have a pro-business approach, and we need state governments to do the heavy share of lifting. I can bore you about Urana Dam up near in George Christensen's part of the world. This is a dam that the size of 480,000 Olympic swimming pools, being pushed by private sector interests, but state Labor said they support it, but aren't sending on a simple email from the state government to the federal government so these people can access some funding from the feds. This dam will help grow the economy. So we've got to do nation building things also.
I want to talk about a man that you would know well. He returned today as Deputy Prime Minister. A lot of critics, not just in politics but in the media, saying this will be terrible for the government, that Barnaby Joyce is an embarrassment. I think history proves that incorrect. I think he's always been a very, very effective cut-through retail politician. Here he is in the chamber, acting as Prime Minister effectively, with Scott Morrison quarantined at the Lodge. And here's Barnaby Joyce taking it to Anthony Albanese.
Mr Speaker, I suppose I was reflecting on what would happen if the member for Grayndler was the government. And I must say at the time it was terrifying. It was terrifying. I was overcome with fear and trepidation as to what might happen if the Labor Party was to be the government. But later on, after I cooled down, I realised that we were the government and everything was fine.
Yeah, well, that wasn't really it, James, but Barnaby really had a crack at Anthony Albanese. He says he wants him there for keeps. He wants to keep Albo there. They'll have his measure. It was reminiscent, not the same finesse, but reminiscent of attacks we used to see from Paul Keating.
I was just thinking that when you played that clip, that Barnaby is someone who is channeling the inner Paul Keating, and I hope he doesn't hold that against me, but Barnaby is someone who is a great retail politician. He's going to work closely with Scott Morrison to stand up for Queensland and Australia. And I speak as a senator who is based in regional Queensland. I live outside of Warwick on the Darling Downs. And what people across Australia want is politicians who are prepared to stand up. And I'm not dissing Michael McCormack at all. Michael McCormack was, to me, a strong leader of the Nationals, and I'm someone who is a Liberal National but sits with the Liberals down here, so I'm not going to comment on the changes that happened, but the King is dead, long live the King. And Barnaby just has that ability to connect with people, and he has that turn of phrase, and he's someone who's going to add a frisson of excitement. And the fact we're just saying Barnaby, he's a bit like Boris. People just use that one name. If you talk about Barnaby, there's only one Barnaby and there's only one Boris, and that's a good thing.
But is Barnaby Joyce right on climate policy, or is Scott Morrison? Because at the moment they can't both be.
I think you'll find they've got more in common then they have disagreements. But Barnaby has said that he will reflect the National Party's policy. Scott Morrison is reflecting his policy, and I'm sure that the two of them, way above my pay grade, as the Deputy Prime Minister and the Prime Minister, will have a discussion and come to an agreement, and that's a good thing. The Nationals will look after their constituency, and the Liberals will look after their constituency, and the government will have a settled policy position. And we'll take that to the election. One thing we won't be taking to the election is more taxes, which is what Labor want to do. And as a Queensland Senator, I'm not going to support anything that's going to hurt Queensland jobs or Queensland businesses, and neither will the Prime Minister, and neither will Barnaby.
James McGrath, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It'd be great for Scott Morrison and Barnaby Joyce to get together to thrash out that climate position. They can't do it in person over a beer at the moment because Scott Morrison's stuck at the lodge. They might have to do it through the fence or over Zoom, perhaps.